Hello, everyone. I've had some audio issues with my computer, my school computer. This is the second or third one I've gotten in the last couple months. I thought I had all the technical difficulties worked out. We rebooted some stuff. We downloaded Teams again onto it. We thought that may be what it was. We checked it this morning. I went to a different location and then had a Teams meeting with my wife. That didn't work, or it worked fine after we had reviewed it, everything up. We started today, and the first 40 minutes of fifth periods went very well, and then the audio cut out again. Thus, you're getting a YouTube video only because I don't know if it's a Teams issue on the computer or if it's an audio issue on the computer. And I've put in about like 30 hours into trying to fix this problem at this point. So I've just decided to go ahead and use my phone for the video. Hopefully this answers all your questions from the questions that I gave you for the assignment. If it doesn't, if you're still confused, that's fine. Just please get a hold of me. The questions are going to be worth a lot of points. I'm going to try to make it worth about a test grade worth of an assignment. So if you don't do some of the question because you couldn't find it or you didn't understand exactly what I was looking for, ask me. Please just contact me via text message, email. Do not send messages to me via Remind. It does not work well. I'll get those, but sometimes it's very delayed. And so by the time you want an answer to something that usually is somewhat important, it might be 12 hours later or something like that before I see the Remind come through my email, because there is such a delay. A lot of times if you guys give me a Remind message at like 3 o'clock, for instance, I don't get the email till like 6, 7 o'clock at night, and by then you don't care anymore. So please text me at 336-392-7721, or go ahead and email me. Texting is obviously the best thing. I'll get on it immediately. My phone number is also on my Canvas page. Right in the front, you can see the contact information. So without any more pause and action, let's go ahead and get started with number one. Medieval Western Europe and most of Eastern Europe were seen as backward and uncivilized in around 1000, and even before that, when they came into contact with people from the Byzantine Empire, when they came in contact with people from the Ottoman / Muslim side of the world, Middle East, via trade, North Africa, things of that nature. Why were they so backward? So the reason I'm asking this question is a couple things. We're supposed to start at 1200, but just starting you at 1200 without giving you at least some sort of background from what's happening at least 100 years back is very, very difficult. Some of these regions, Europe being one of them, you got to go a little bit further back than that in order to truly understand what's going on, say in 1200, or we're going to really get going next week. So you have the downfall of Rome as a empire. Rome splits into two with Constantine, establishment of Constantinople, which eventually becomes what is known as the Eastern Roman Empire, which encompasses a lot of modern-day Turkey, parts of the Middle East, expands north as well. And then the Western Roman Empire, also known as the Roman Empire. Constantine wanted to move it there because all of the advantages of trade and all the it's mostly the power center and the money center of the Roman Empire had kind of shifted a little bit. It made sense for Constantine to move his capital at that point. And over the years, it slowly devolved into two almost totally, completely separate entities. So when Rome falls around 489 to the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, Rome, the city itself, obviously they rebuild, but the empire had already been picked off a little bit before Rome itself actually falls. And by the time it's over with, it just is calling it an empire. It's just remnants of an empire at that point. So you're down to just regional rule mostly. The beginning of feudalism, mannerism, fiefdoms, tribal rule almost comes back into play. So you've got this very apocalyptic, almost is probably the best way to put it, and not some of the port cities in Europe or things like that, but definitely some, you see old remnants of the Roman Empire even to this day, scattered throughout Europe, French Riviera, southern Spain, Bath, England. Even as far as Bath, England, you can see some Roman ruins. So the Romans had built roads throughout Europe, and they had built aqueducts, and they had really become like one of the more advanced civilizations on Earth, as far as technology goes and as far as building capability goes. Surely you learned about Rome at one point in your life. And to go from that to being introduced to people from the Byzantine Empire, or people from the Middle East during the Crusades, and if you read primary sources from some of the people that met these people from Western and Central Europe and Northern Europe during the Crusades, they are a little dumbfounded in how backwards they are and how uncivilized, uncouth they are. And when I was in college, I remember I had a professor, Dennis Beams, and he had me, it was a world history class, and he had me or us actually read lots of primary sources, and you're going to do that in here in your class throughout the year quite a bit. But you're reading these primary sources, and we had to compare and contrast a letter from some people, a group of people that had met some of the travelers during the Crusades, and the description of those travelers and what they acted like, and the lack of respect they had for them and their civilization, and things of that nature. And they really looked down upon them by and large. Not just because they were trying to invade their homeland or a different religion, but really they felt superior, and they described them in a way that seemed like they were barbarians. And I remember Professor Feames, then the next page is a description from Western Europeans who are either A, colonizing, or B, sending missionaries around the globe to send the message of Jesus Christ and try to set up some sort of mission for the Catholic Church to flourish and to convert people. And so you're talking about Southeast Asia, you're talking about the Western Hemisphere, and when you juxtapose these two letters, I'll never forget it. It was like 20 years ago. They're so similar in their language and how they spoke and about who they were encountering. And it really is amazing how far back some of Europe, parts of Europe, had gone during the Middle Ages. And there's a myriad of reasons for that, and we'll discuss that here in a second. But it really tamped down a lot of stuff. Now, there is some trade coming in, especially towards the latter part, just before the Crusades, from the Silk Road, from the Byzantine Empire. And with trade usually comes innovation, but it was just so stark compared to, you're going to learn about the Sung Dynasty, you're going to learn about the Silk Road and what's happening in Asia, and what's happening in the Middle East, and what's happening in Northern Africa, even compared to what's happening in Europe at this time. It's really pretty stark. And it's always been fascinating to me as well to look at some great civilization that goes backwards that much, that doesn't happen that often in history. I mean, you might go backwards a little bit for maybe 20 years or something like that, but to have this much of a bounce back, it's a major pendulum shift. And they were looked at very similar to how missionaries will look at people they encounter 500 years later, which is amazing to me. Number two, let's finish up number one. Additionally, how the new ideas, innovations, and norms slowly, it was trade is how they really got going before the Crusades. And especially those port cities, a lot of the port cities throughout Western Europe, they were just so different than some of the inner cities would have been. There would have been a lot more activity there. So just like a lot of things in history, we tend to group these things into categories, so it's either this or that. there is more nuance, especially in the latter part, just before the Crusades of Europe. You do see some building, you do see some advancement coming, especially in those port cities. But by and large, they're really far behind. But that trade trickling did help out quite a bit. Number two, at our school, we are Vikings, and we often say that Vikings don't bully. We used to say that all the time. I don't know that we still say that, but hopefully we still say that. And but when you study Vikings, that doesn't really seem to be the case at all. It seems like Vikings lived to bully people. Like that's what Vikings were. It's kind of like, what do you live for? Do you live for basketball? Do you live for some other sort of sport? Do you live for dance or cheer or something like that? Do you dance, or do you live to teach history and economics like I do, and to eat delicious food? Well, the Vikings seem to live specifically to bully people. They didn't have a whole lot of natural resources, so they went out and they plundered what they could, to the best of their ability to get some of these resources. They did settle some things as well in certain spots, but they were bullies. And the point of mentioning the Vikings is really they were not the only bullies on the block at this time. So as we start to fall, society in Western Europe starts to fall into some sort of, I don't know, advancement decay, for lack of a better term. The reasons for it are also some of the causes for it, if that makes sense. So the reason that it gets exasperated and the reason that it's caused are often the same thing. Feudalism is one of those things. Feudalism is a pseudo-command economy in a lot of ways. Not a whole lot of opportunity for advancement or anything like that. Not a whole lot of trade going on. Usually the lord of the manor or the lord of the fiefdom has a tremendous amount of control over things. Now, the serfs, which we'll talk about in a second, you do have a lot more autonomy than necessarily like a classical indentured servant, but it is a closed society in a lot of ways. And there's not a lot of travel going on. Usually single men, maybe sometimes married men traveled and they left, but it's unsafe to travel. And the more unsafe it got, it seems to exacerbate the downfall of Rome. And if anything, being a Roman citizen or being attached to Rome helped you to travel a lot more safe than you would have if you were not in Rome at this time. Once that goes away, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths at first were a problem. They start to get manors and fiefdoms as well. But you have the Vikings, you have the Huns, or essentially Vikings on horseback. You have neighboring knights. Knights are great. Knights are, you definitely would be very happy to have knights in your fiefdom, in your manor, where the Lord is protecting you with those knights. You'd be very happy to have them. You would be very afraid of other people's knights, other areas' knights. And if they came to town because they were not getting paid well, or they were ordered by their lord to go ahead and sack the area, and then they would get paid in some land, and maybe they would get their own fiefdom, that's very scary to individuals. And so that's the time we're talking about. We really are talking about an area of or a time of fear. And a lot of that fear doesn't go away for a long time. It really is until the Renaissance. And once you guys get to the Renaissance, you hopefully will understand. Just it's not, you tend to focus on the Renaissance as a rebirth of art, which it most definitely is. But it really is just, it's kind of a rewriting of society in so many different ways as well. It leads to the Reformation. It leads initially to people questioning the forms of government that they're in. But it really is kind of the beginnings of a new social contract. And speaking of that, let's go to number 3, what a serf is, and how did feudalism turn them into somewhat into indentured servants. It goes on to the question is, well, how did many of them, or what did many of them do because of that, and how did feudalism also contribute to the lack of intellectual advancement during the Middle Ages? And again, I'm trying to get you to see there's multi-layered reasons why things go backwards and they don't advance mathematically, they don't advance philosophically, even for the exception of maybe Thomas Aquinas, who you should have read about in this chapter. They the lack of education, all of those types of things are there. So a serf, and it depended on where you were at, but it was probably not the best life to begin with. But certain serfs, depending on how what the Lord was acting like in that area, it could be really brutal. It could be really, really, really tough on you. You've got to give a large percentage of your crops that you grow usually on the Lord's land over to the Lord. You got to pay them. You got to probably pay your priest as well through tithing. It's trying to eke out survival a lot of the times. And farming, serfs are usually farmers. You have almost always farmers, and farming is just very difficult. The hard thing about farming, even today, to be honest with you, is when you have a good year, you're like, woohoo, I got a good year, I'm gonna make some money. But the problem is, if you had a good year, chances are everybody around you had a good year. And if everybody around you had a good year because the weather was good or whatever was going on, well, then your crops are not as valuable because everybody had a really good harvest. And if you had a bad year, that means everybody else had a bad year. And yes, the food prices might go up, but people tend to find substitutes, things of that nature. And it's just really tough, even modern days. Back then, it was really, really tough. It's not like there's a social safety net necessarily to help you out. You would obviously help your neighbor or things like that, or the church might help you out, but starvation is something that occurred often, sometimes due to weather throughout human history, and definitely it happened during this era as well. So you were kind of tied though. If you had a house or a little bit of property, very high probability it wasn't worth much if you were serf. And so you didn't really build a future for the next generation that was going to necessarily be better than the one you were living in. And you just, that's not indentured servitude, but it's not that far off in a lot of ways. The ability to advance, the ability to make something of yourself and betterment for your family. A lot of people that took off, maybe left and went to some of the coastal cities, things like that, saw that opportunity, but it was tough, and that acceptance of that is a new social contract. A social contract, which is something you guys are going to be very much steeped in this class this year. We have a social contract, for instance, in the United States. Is a written social contract called the Constitution of the United States. Every state has their own constitution, and every local municipality has their own charter. These are all social contracts. This is what the state will do for you. In return, you have to pay taxes and obey these laws, and you get to vote and you get to decide. That's your social contract. This social contract that they set up was much more serious than that. You really have to give up a lot of autonomy to the Lord of a fiefdom, of the manor, and you give that up willingly in exchange for some safety. And a lot of the times, it's just it doesn't make you that much safer a lot of times, and you just end up losing what Americans, at least from an American perspective, would feel. I think, I know I would feel this way, freedom. I would feel like I was tied to this little tiny community and tied to this person in charge of this community, and that I could never get ahead, and I was never going to be that person unless you train and become a knight or something like that, or get really, really lucky. That's a tough life, and that's gonna get you maybe closer to church, which could be a good thing, but it's not gonna lead itself to a lot of intellectual advancement. It's not going to, you're not going to be pondering the meaning of life that much. You're not going to be thinking about the future. And I don't know, for me, life is about the future, right? It's about hope of a new day and what can be better tomorrow and what's the next opportunity and the next great adventure. That is not really going on that much during this era in this region. All right, so let's get on to number 4. Who's Clovis? Why did he convert to Christianity? What region did he rule over? This whole set of questions is mostly about northern France, some of the western Germanic states, and what is now modern day Belgium. And Clovis is from that region. And the reason I bring him up in this more than anything else is he's one of many people that end up converting for secular reasons, not for spiritual reasons. All right, so Clovis, like a lot of emperors before him and rulers before him and many after, are going to convert. And when I was in high school, I would read about these things usually in a textbook, and I would think, oh, that's really great. Like they found God and they converted over there, and that makes sense. And whether that God is some associated with Buddhism or Christianity or Judaism or through Islam or whatever it is, hey, happy for somebody to be getting fed. When I got to college and I started reading about this more in depth, it's very rarely the case that a leader does that. Usually a leader converts to something because it's politically astute to do so, meaning that the majority of people that are living in that area at that particular time are already converting to that, or they already have converted to that, so that you are just doing what the masses want to happen anyway, or you convert to it because it's going to get you some more power in some other way. For instance, maybe the most famous out of all of these conversion is Henry of Navarre. And Henry of Navarre, during the French Civil War and the French, they're called the French Wars of Religion, but they are very much a civil war. And they're between 3 different groups, basically the Lutherans, the Calvinists, and the Catholics. And the people fighting it on the ground are very much, they're fighting for their religious freedom, but the people at the top are mostly fighting for power. I always thought they were fighting for a religion. And you read Henry of Navarre's quote, after fighting almost, it's like 3 to 4 years, and he was a very good soldier, or a very good general, very successful. So spending like 3 years killing Catholics, and doing a good job of it through the battlefield, an opportunity comes up through vassalage that it was always there in the first place, which is why they were fighting. More about vassalage in a second. And the opportunity is, hey, if you convert to Catholicism, even though you've been a Calvinist this whole time, and murdering people, like killing the Catholics, if you convert to Catholicism, France is yours. And Henry says, very famously, Paris is worth the Mass, meaning I'll go to Mass, I'll be a Catholic, as long as I get control over everything. And that's a good example of Clovis doing the same thing right here. It's not as much about Christ or the Pope or whatever else as it's opportunistic chance to go ahead and have dominion over more people, have more power. And this is a recurring theme throughout world history. Number 5, explain the roles of the monasteries in medieval Europe. Make sure to include the importance of non-religious services that they provide and how that might have brought many Europeans even closer to church. Well, you guys just spent the last 6 months in COVID world. And in COVID world, I'm a hiker. I got really serious into hiking the last couple of years, so I was able to, hike a lot. It's an activity that you can do even in this. But before I got into hiking, if this would have happened, my wife would have murdered me, I think. Really. Because I would have gone crazy. I would have been so bored. I can only do so much on the computer. I don't even want to see the Netflix, app on my television anymore. I'm not really into social media much, so other than, and I like reading books, so there's always that, but my goodness, this has been, without the activity, the physical activity of getting outside and doing something, I would have gone crazy. I would imagine living during the time period between, say, 500 AD and 1200 AD, maybe even a little bit later, had to at sometimes been mind-blowingly boredom personified. I mean, it had to be just so much boredom. First of all, the monasteries would help you with some very fundamental things. They would feed your spirit, right? They want to help you get closer to God, give you quiet space to pray and reflect and those types of things. And as boring as that might sound to you, would it have been that boring without Netflix, without social media, without computers, without your television for the last 4 months? You did 4 months of this. Imagine in a lifetime of this. A lot of people probably I would have turned to for sure, to the monastery. And let's talk about some of the secular things that happened there that were in a lot of ways just as important as the spiritual things they provided, if not more so. So first of all, they would try to educate you and educate you in a few different ways. Better ways of farming, which is very, very important at this time, because you don't want to starve. And also even how to read. Now, mind you, it's reading Latin, and so that's not necessarily the vernacular of the area, but the more you can read, obviously better, because you can communicate better. You have the opportunity to grow intellectually. So this was an outlet for that. They also did practical things like show you how to distill spirits, so distill some liquor. So the importance of distilling liquor to a modern teenager probably seems like, well, we're going to get twisted, we're going to get wasted. I'm sure there was some of that. I'm sure of it. I'm sure people like drinking just as much as Johnny Depp seems to in Pirates of the Caribbean. But it really was for a lot of people kind of like Gatorade. You harvest in the fall. Some fruit, obviously, in the summer. But you need to how do you keep this going all year long? People had root cellars, things like that, to keep your food all year. But distilling of alcohol, oddly enough, was seen as kind of healthy. People could get a large amount of calories all year long through that alcohol. And the monks were very good at doing it. And so you can mess that up relatively easy. I've never tried to make any sort of alcohol like that or beer, but I've had friends that have. And when they give it to you, usually you're a little scared, and the reason you're scared is it tastes just awful. I mean, just horrible. I've had some friends make some wine. My grandmother tried to make wine at one point. It tasted like Schmucker's grape jelly liquefied in a bag. It was just vile. If there would have been a monastery for her to go to and learn how to do it properly, that would have been very, very advantageous for all of us involved. They did this. And so, yes, people probably really enjoy drinking, but also alcohol plays a prominent role throughout a lot of human history in the ability to get more calories into their system. And more calories is a good thing. We as Americans are one of the first countries, if not the first country on earth, that too many calories is the issue with food. For just about everybody else, it's not enough. I'm probably just like a lot of your parents. I look at a glass of water and gain about 1.5 pounds. So I understand that struggle of weight. But when you look at that struggle of food, like I do, at least as an American, which is I want more chips and salsa. I want more queso dip, right? Just like you guys. And I have to keep myself away from it. That's not the problem for a lot of people, even on Earth today. Like at least 4 billion out of the 7 billion of us that exist on this big blue ball are still worried about food and having enough calories every single day. And so when we talked about this on the meet and greet, one of the things that students tend to struggle with is the sociology of people. In any time period. And it's really important, or it's really good to remember that there's a high probability during this entire class that people are worried about food. They're worried about starvation. They're probably drinking a lot of alcohol for a lot of different reasons. And that the having enough calories would have been something that someone was thinking about a lot, almost all the time. And so these monasteries, to be able to help you farm better, to be able to teach you what to do with your harvest, really valuable. And the monasteries weren't stupid. That would have been a very good way to draw people closer and like, hey, let's get you talking about this. Let me also talk to you about about the Bible. So I mean, very, very, very Catholic, Western Catholic, Roman Catholic. By the end of, obviously for the Crusades, from things like this. So pretty neat. And this is very much the social part. So kids have problems, I have problems trying to think about the social aspect of this era or whatever era it is. Always good to think about, hey, how were the crops? How was the weather during this era? Would that cause something? In one of the classes earlier that you may or may not have heard me on, we were talking about the French Revolution for a little bit, and the French Revolution, that the weather and the bad weather specifically, and the crop failures might, seriously, it might be just as important to contributing to the French Revolution, for instance, as anything else, as Marie Antoinette, as Louis XVI, as the Enlightenment, as anything else. It might just be the lack of food and the people starving. And when that happens, people they're willing to listen to other things. When the economy is really, really bad, or you're worried about putting food on the table, all of a sudden some radical ideas don't sound so radical anymore. You start thinking that the current system is rigged and it's not for me, it's not working for me, and then people and change happens a lot of times during these things. And it's important to remember it's not a coincidence a lot of times when revolution or when social upheaval happens that there's some sort of economic, and a lot of times, especially in world history, economic reason happens to be bad crops or not being able to find food. If you can't feed your family, as a father, I can tell you, that'll drive you crazy. That'll keep you up all night. And you're willing to do whatever you need to do in order to provide for your family. And keep that in mind when you're writing essays this year. All right, Charles the Hammer, Charles Martel. This is number 6. What's the significance of his victory in the Battle of Tours in 732? It is one of a handful of battles that have just monumental ramifications for world history. They're not minor battles for war or anything like that. This keeps the Ottomans, the Muslims, from expanding further into Europe. They had already taken most of the Iberian Peninsula, which is modern-day Portugal and Spain, and we're creeping up. And they're going to try to keep on going north quite a bit even for the next 700 years. Around 1512 or so, they get into Vienna, and the Holy Roman Emperor, along with a couple of Polish generals, turn them back at that point, which is another major battle in world history. The world would be different. Who knows what could have happened? It's one of those what if things. The Spanish Armada's battle against Queen Elizabeth is another one of these. There's a lot of battles in Asia that happen that are also similar to this. They're just major things that alter the history of the world. This is one of those. It could have been a lot different. Everything could have been a lot different if not for that particular battle. And look for those throughout world history when they happen. That's why I mentioned, and I'm having a discussion with you right now about it. It's not, world history is very different from, like an AP World History course is very different from, say, watching the History Channel. And the History Channel is usually a lot about, if you watch the documentaries or things like that, it's usually a lot about like the military strategy. It's really about the, who sent troops where and did what and took whatever hill and whatever, and that's how they won the battle. AP World History and most AP Social Studies classes, what happened during the battle usually isn't as significant, maybe Gettysburg and AP US, as significant as what that battle meant, what it meant politically, what it meant socially at that time, and what it meant for historical causation. So all I was trying to do with question 6 really is to get you guys used to thinking that way for the rest of the year. Because most history students, myself included, when I first started studying history, that's what I did. I looked at, this person went here and he sent these troops here and he outflanked them here and all that stuff, and that's super fascinating. but so is this. And as I've gotten more experience as a history teacher, this is where it's at. It's not the fact that this general did something that won the battle that fascinates me anymore. It's the winning of the battle that fascinates me. What is the ramifications of that? How did that change history? How did that battle, the victory there, change future? And if you go to Guilford Courthouse ever, and you have the opportunity to go there, that's a great example of it. Guilford Courthouse, which is this huge Revolutionary War battle, it sets up the stage for Yorktown, which is the end of Cornwallis, and that's the end of the war for the British against George Washington. And so it's not, it's fascinating to find out about Greene shooting grape shot at his own men and things like that. But it really is at the end of the presentation that if you ever go there, about what happens after Guilford Courthouse battle, the historical causation of it. That's how you have to start thinking about this class in your book. Every time you read something, okay, what happens because of this? What happened to the people because of it? What happened politically because of this? And that's a good one for that. All right, so number 7, who was essentially the first Holy Roman Emperor? In what ways did Europe start to change when he was in power? And what happened to his empire after his death? So this is Charlemagne. Charlemagne, who doesn't really have the title of Holy Roman Emperor, but does have the blessing of the Pope to be in charge of all this, of Christendom, northern Christendom. And he built an empire that's more powerful than the Pope, when the Pope was very powerful at this time. Had his own army, had his own state in central Italy that he controlled, his own subjects, his own fiefdom, his own kingdom, really. And he used it quite a bit. This is different. This is a break. This is kind of like a preview of future things. It's a throwback to the old Roman Empire, and it's also a preview of things to come. Charlemagne is, even though it's going to take a while from that. He's trying to centralize a state and build a bureaucracy. And he was pretty good at doing that. Very powerful, very smart, very capable person in almost every possible way you could think of. And it really is kind of like the blueprint for the future of Europe, which is a bureaucracy, a centralized state, a powerful person in charge of a large geographic area, which was not happening before this time. You really have mostly geographic areas and many different states within those geographic areas, usually separated by some sort of natural boundary. So France being separated from the Mediterranean and the Pyrenees and the Alps, and Germany being separated the same way. And that's really how things were. And within those geographic areas, you had many, many different states and many, many powerful fiefdoms, small ones all over the place, especially in Germany. Whereas France had larger versions of those. Vassalages will change some of that as well. But Charlemagne kind of sets it up like, hey, this is how this could be. His sons inherit it. There's a lot of infighting. They're also not their father. They're not as capable people of running a state. And it kind of goes back to what it was before Charlemagne. You're going to have, though, future leaders that are called the Holy Roman Emperor. Please don't believe that they're all the same. Just because Charlemagne was so powerful and was setting up a bureaucracy and really kind of a pseudo-empire, most Holy Roman Emperors don't really have an empire after this. There's a couple of them that you could kind of go, well, look, they have a tremendous amount of influence and also power and everything else. Philip II comes to mind, a couple of them. But by and large, they were figureheads that carried some influence. They're not as like, you do this or else. Like, they're not the king of an entire, they're not an emperor necessarily. They did have the blessing, again, of a pope. And they often gathered armies to fight Ottomans or other people, but not usually one like for their state versus another state, although that does happen, especially in the 30 Years' War, but that's for a lot longer away. So it's always confusing to students to see this Holy Roman Emperor and then also see the territory that's called the Holy Roman Empire, usually Germanic states. But within the Holy Roman Empire, calling it a federation would be probably the best way, like a German federation. they didn't really listen to the Holy Roman Emperor as much, and people didn't really feel like, by and large, like the Holy Roman Emperor was in charge of them as much as their king or their lord. So they do have some power and influence, and some of them a lot more than others do. But it's not really like a Roman emperor, for the exception Charlemagne really was. He was about as close as you could get to that, and his sons were not, to say the least. So that's the first one. And after his death, it all just falls apart and goes back into kind of what it was beforehand. Number 8, after the official establishment of the Holy Roman Empire, it appears through Europe was unified under their one emperor, but the truth, it was very different. We had the real power after Charlemagne for the next 400 years, the Holy Roman Empire wide. That's the Pope, really, the Pope and local leaders, small manors, small fiefdoms, smaller kings. Eventually they became kings. They really had more of an input and power, and even local priests. Local priests had a tremendous amount of power. And next week we'll talk about some of the abuses of those power, selling of indulgences and taking people's land during the Black Plague, things like that they shouldn't. Not all the priests, but enough of them that it helps cause the Reformation. This gets us into number 9, which is a vassal and what vassalage and the practice of vassalage is. As after Charlemagne, people starts, you want to build your empire. You want to build and get more land. But feudalism was tough. So you get these knights, and these knights they're going to get very squirrely if they're not getting paid. And most knights want to be a lord themselves. So you start getting where larger fiefdoms attack some of the smaller fiefdoms, which in turn makes the smaller fiefdoms say to friendly larger fiefdoms, hey, could I pay you, or could I give an allegiance to you, or could I do something? Those of you who are, what is that horrible show on HBO? It's Game of Thrones. It was a really good show until the end. But it's pretty accurate how those things work, like in the North, like, the King of the North. You started giving vassalage to somebody that would help you out when times got tough, if you were going to get attacked, for instance. But some of that vassalage also included, like, hey, rights to my land if I don't have a male heir, or rights to certain amounts of my land through connection, and then you start getting married and expanding your empire that way. And you would think this makes sense, and it seems like it does make sense. You're a smaller fiefdom, you got to get a larger fiefdom to help you. But sometimes you don't have a male heir, or sometimes there's a question about who has the legit claim to your fiefdom or your throne because you died in battle, or heaven forbid, what happens one time is Henry Navarre dies, he gets assassinated. One king is going to be at a jousting tournament, and things get out of hand, and an arrow goes through his heart, and he dies, and he's got no heir. And next thing you know, lots of people are saying, I've got vassalage over this area, I should have this, I'm going to get it, I'm going to take it now. And instead of saying, well, okay, the guy's dead, he doesn't have an heir, you guys should figure that out yourself, that's not how people work, right? So they're like, no, there's nobody in charge of the Normandy region of France. I'm the King of England. I have vassalage rights over there. It's legal, even though it's 150, 250 years old. I'm coming to get it. I'm taking it. And this starts wars. It starts a lot of wars, which eventually does, and the book describes this pretty well, it does kind of sort of lead to a centralized state, so to a more modern way of looking at the European continent than the unrecognizable European continent that we're discussing right now. The last one, and that starts happening between like 900 to 1300-ish. That's when this vassalage is, it starts out, seems like it's a good idea, and eventually turns into all-out war, especially the 100 Years' War, which is really nasty stuff between England and France. Happens during the Black Plague as well. So, number 10. The vassal would be the weaker of the two, by the way, the one that's giving up some rights, money, whatever, land to the larger king or larger lord for that protection. The last one is number 10, the Duke of Normandy. Where's Normandy on your map? Normandy is in northern France. and invaded England in 1066, um, and became known as what? How did the government system he helped to set up mirror that of China during this era, and hypothesize why his invasion and the vassal system could lead to future problems. We already answered that his invasion and vassal system leads to future problems, but all of this happens with the Duke of Normandy in England, and this does set up the Hundred Years' War. We're going to get into that soon, and the significance of the Hundred Years' War is it's not the battles in between, and it's not even really Joan of Arc, although she plays a huge role in the victory, the eventual victory after 100 years of the French, who should have won right away. But what happens is it sets up the stage for a claim from both sides to both territories, to the English territory by the French and by the French territory by the English. And it's not, it is obviously not good. Now, he's going to set up, the Duke of Normandy, he is going to set up because he wants taxes collected, right? He sends these tax collectors out. Not everybody pays their taxes, just like today. And so he starts hiring agents to collect these taxes for him, and a lot of them are ex-knights or something like that, and he calls them sheriffs, which we've borrowed that terminology here, which obviously means something else. But these sheriffs you would pay your taxes. If you didn't pay your taxes, the sheriffs might get angry, and you would not want that. This is similar and mirrors the other side of the planet at this time in China. Now, again, the book mentions this, and that's why I put it in the question. It is not as organized as the Chinese were. It is not as advanced bureaucracy as the Chinese was, which is based on testing and Buddhism and things like that. It is nowhere near that. But you've got shoguns in Asia. You've got sheriffs over there. You've got you're starting to see an advanced taxation system, an advanced bureaucracy, at least compared to what the medieval ages was. Again, not as advanced as China, not as advanced as Japan either. But it is the beginnings of something that was also happening on the other side of the world, and you're going to see that as a common theme throughout this class as well. And unfortunately, especially at the end of the 19th and early 20th century, you're going to see genocide happening, which was something that really didn't really cross too many people's minds, happening often and in different cultures and in different time period for about 50 years all over the world. And it's quite a phenomenon when these things happen. It's unfortunate sometimes it's great. But again, when I already answered that last part of 10, to hypothesize this evasion and the vassal system, it does lead to problems. It leads to large scale wars. It leads to people interpreting the vassalage to their advantage. When people are seeking power, when they are boxed in because they need more power, maybe there's pressure from the knights at this time, or there's pressure nowadays from the democracy, from the people, they don't need much of an excuse though when they're looking for power to have war. War is a thing that can help some people out sometimes, help a leader out, especially if you win those wars. And it's no different than 1,000 years ago. And these old vassalages that are set up just kind of act as an excuse to go to war. And these wars usually turn out pretty horrible for average people. That's who wars are always hard on, and especially the 100 Years' War, which we'll talk about next week. It's the serfs. They're the ones that are dying. They're the ones that are killing people. They're the ones that have to deal with the mental issues afterwards. They have to deal with being their leg amputated maybe afterwards. They have to deal with, their families have to deal with them maybe not coming home afterwards. Again, I'm trying to get you guys to think a little bit differently about all of this, which is, history is usually taught, and again, when you get into AP, it's different, and some of you are going to struggle with this in the beginning. You got to think about what it was like for the average person. Try to put yourself into these positions. None of you are related to Donald Trump, I don't think. None of you are related to Barack Obama, I don't think, or I don't know, a leader of another country. So it should be easy for you to think, okay, I'm middle class, this is how this is working. If I was living during this time as a serf, how would I feel about this? How would I feel about this particular war? And what are the effects of it on me? And so vassalage doesn't end up being very good in the long run for a lot of common folk. Anyway, I hope this helped you out. If it didn't help you out, please, please, please text me 336-392-7721. I'll be happy to answer your questions via text or via phone conference, maybe speakerphone or Skype or whatever way you feel most comfortable getting some tutoring help. I would love to tutor you face to face though, if that's possible. Being able to read your reactions on your face and look into your eyes is the best way to know that whether or not the answer or the help I'm trying to give you is actually helping you or not. But I'm happy to do whatever you're most comfortable with. Again, I hope this helped out. I enjoyed doing it, even though I tried to do it, and I'm so sorry about that audio. I can't tell you how sorry I am. Hopefully that's fixed by Tuesday afternoon for all of you. I will try to ensure that it is. I'll go grab a new computer. Hopefully that works and we can get it going. If not, maybe I'll buy a microphone. I can't find my microphone anywhere, but I'll try to make sure something works out. And if not, I'll be making another video for you. Again, sorry. Thanks. Have a great weekend. Enjoy yourselves. Enjoy some downtime. Enjoy your family. Get out and do a hike. See ya.